Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Lucy Ream.
Welcome everyone to Waconia High School and Carver County. I'm Representative Lucy Ream and I represent Chanhassen and Chaska in the Minnesota House. Thank you so much for taking time out of a busy Saturday to join us today. This has been a tough year, and we have seen too much heartbreak due to gun violence. I wish it weren't so. It also happens to be 23 years since we lost Senator Paul Wellstone. He used to say, if we don't fight hard enough for the things we stand for, at some point we have to recognize that we don't really stand for them. My DFL colleagues and I are ready to take action to address the scourge of gun violence. We have a plan that would get weapons of war off of our streets and make our homes, our schools, our communities safer. So today we gather to hear stories from our neighbors and our friends, and also to support one another. I want us to envision a Minnesota where everyone is kept safe from gun violence. All of us, whether we are Republicans or Democrats or neither or somewhere in between, must reject the hate and the violence. Let us come together as Minnesotans to wage peace, to build inclusive communities, and to work to build a stronger and a healthier future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Annunciation parent and teacher at Waconia Middle School, Tess Rada.
Thank you. My name is Tess Rada. My daughter Lila is a third grader at Annunciation Catholic School. And for the past 3 years, I have been the theater educator for the fall play at Waconia Middle School. Thank you. I know firsthand how incredible the people of Waconia are, and more specifically, I know how wonderful and kind and unique and creative the children of Waconia are. And as a mother and as someone who works with kids every single day, I live in constant fear that what happened to us at Annunciation will happen here. On August 27th, I got a call shortly after getting to work. It was my daughter's dad. He said, "There's been an incident at the school. I don't know anything yet, but shots have been fired." As I rushed to the school, a friend called me with a headline: "Mass shooting at Annunciation Catholic School during Mass. 17 injured, 2 dead. The number of injured would eventually rise to 30. My daughter had forgotten her lunch that day, so her dad was sitting in the parking lot after dropping it off when he heard 116 shots fired through the stained glass of the church. Every student in the school was inside. The shooting lasted 2 minutes and 30 seconds. In those 2 minutes and 30 seconds, we lost 2 young lives, 8-year-old Fletcher Merkel and 10-year-old Harper Moisky. All of the students there lost their sense of safety and their innocence. I want you to imagine for a moment that Fletcher was your son, that you dropped him off at school one morning, and when you heard there'd been a shooting, you rushed to the school and you tried to find him, but you couldn't because he was gone. I want you to imagine that Harper was your daughter and you never got the chance to hug her again. Right now at Annunciation, Lila and her friends are in costume. They're trunk-or-treating. Harper and Fletcher should be there in their costumes, playing with their friends and eating way too much candy. But instead, they're gone. And we'll never get to know what they might have become. Prom king, spelling bee champion, science fair winner, volleyball star, football star, scientist, teacher, maybe even president. All of those possibilities are gone for them. And if your child was one of the lucky ones who survived, imagine finding them that day, shaking, crying, covered in blood. Imagine the aftermath, the life-altering injuries, the PTSD, the sleepless nights, dropping to the ground instinctively when they hear a loud noise. Imagine trying to explain to your child why this happened. Imagine being a teacher who had to throw their body over their students. Imagine being a principal who held a child's hand as they bled out on the ground from a gunshot wound, waiting for an ambulance that felt like it would never come. The shooting happened on a Wednesday. The following Monday, I started directing here in Waconia. Working with your students here was healing, but the difference between the children of Waconia and the children at Annunciation is stark. The children in Waconia are still innocent, and they're still full of laughter. The children of Annunciation had to grow up in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and they're haunted. I know the people of Waconia love their children as fiercely as we do, and I ask you to love them enough to make sure that the chance of this ever happening here is zero. The gunmen at Annunciation bought their weapons legally. If they hadn't, this would not have happened. You may hear later about the kind of damage that AR-style weapons and high-capacity magazines inflict, especially on young bodies. If a gunman opened fire in your school, you would pray that they didn't have one. I saw the gouges those bullets left in the pews the kids were sitting in, and I can only imagine what it did to their bodies. I understand that guns are a part of American life, and the right to own them is constitutionally protected. But the cost of these particular weapons is simply too high. We must do everything to protect our kids, tighten laws, make mental health care more accessible, enforce red flag laws. No single law will be enough, but doing nothing is unforgivable. Your representatives here in Waconia, Senator Julia Coleman and Representative Jim Nash, have the power to make a difference right now. They can choose to be the kind of leaders who rise above politics and put the safety of your children first. Standing with us in this fight would make them heroes in the eyes of our students, not because of party affiliation, but because they had the courage to do what's right when it mattered most. This should not be a partisan issue. It's not about right or left. It's about protecting the lives of Minnesota's children, about ensuring that no parent ever receives the call that we Annunciation parents did. Common sense gun laws save lives. Our representatives have a chance right now to be remembered not for playing it safe, but for standing up when our community needed them most. Fletcher and Harper deserved better. The students of Minneapolis deserve better, and the students of Waconia deserve better. I can't change what happened to Lila and her friends, and I can't change what happened to Harper and Fletcher, and I can't change the trauma that our community endured, but I will spend the rest of my life fighting so that your community and your children never have to go through what we went through. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator today is Dr. Mark Gorelick, the recently retired president and CEO of Children's Minnesota. He recently wrote and published a book titled Saving Our Kids, an ER Doc's Common Sense Solution to the Gun Crisis. Please welcome Dr. Gorelick and our distinguished panel.
Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to recognize some folks here. First, I'd like to start with the people who make this conversation possible. We have a number of elected officials who have joined us here today. And I know you're here with us because of your continued commitment to protecting Minnesota families from gun violence. So if you are an elected official, will you please raise your hand or stand up so we can acknowledge you? Thank you all. I know that we have some folks in the audience here today who are survivors of gun violence. And it's your strength and your resilience that inspires us and reminds us of why this work is so important. So if you are a survivor of gun violence, will you please raise your hand or stand to be recognized? And to the families, friends, and community members from Annunciation Catholic Church and School, you've been in our hearts every day for the last 8 weeks. Would you please stand or raise your hand so we can acknowledge you? You know, let's start by acknowledging the gravity of this topic. This is not an easy thing for us to talk about. And it is essential that we do talk about it, because if we don't, lives will continue to be lost. Now, forgive me for being this blunt, but in my 25 years of practicing pediatric emergency medicine, I saw firsthand and far too often the physical and emotional devastation that happens when a bullet tears through the body of a young child. And it is heartbreaking, and it is appalling. And even more appalling is the fact that, as many of you know, since 2020, gun injury has been the leading cause of death for children and youth in the United States. Think about that. The leading cause of death for kids. And it's a huge problem for Americans of all ages. It's a toll that we in Minnesota are particularly familiar with. In recent months, we have experienced the assassination of Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, the attempted murder of Senator Hoffman and his wife, the brutal massacre of young children at prayer in school at Annunciation Church in my own neighborhood in Minneapolis, and the daily gun homicides and suicides that happen in every corner of this state. Every week, 10 Minnesotans die from an injury caused by a bullet fired from a gun. And another 50 or 60 are shot and survive, each and every week. That is a public health crisis if there ever was one. And so we need to call it out for what it is. We need to recognize it as a public health crisis, and now we need to act like it. We need to take steps that will prevent these entirely preventable deaths and injuries from happening in the first place. Now look, like any public health issue, gun injury is complex, it is nuanced, it will only be addressed with a comprehensive, multifaceted approach that reflects the complexity of the causes. But we know that that approach must include evidence-based, proven, common-sense laws that limit the lethality of guns and bullets. And so I am excited and honored to be here to facilitate this conversation with this fantastic panel to talk about how we are going to move forward and save Minnesota lives. So let me introduce our panelists. Governor Tim Walz is the 41st governor of Minnesota. He is a veteran of the Army National Guard. He is a former teacher and coach and a longtime public servant. Under his leadership, Minnesota has made historic progress, providing universal free school meals, protecting reproductive freedom, cutting middle-class taxes, strengthening voting rights, expanding paid family and medical leave, and setting the state on a path to 100% clean energy by 2040. Governor Walz. Michelle Morse-Wendt is an upper elementary school teacher. She's been a teacher for the last 17 years in the Moundsville School District. She is the parent of an 8th grader and a 2nd grader, and she is a candidate for the Roseville Area School Board. Michelle. Dr. Tim Coomer is a fellow emergency physician. He is Assistant Medical Director of Emergency Medical Services, and he was the first physician on the scene at the Annunciation school shooting. Dr. Coomer. Emma Brown is the Executive Director of Giffords, where she oversees the organization's work to save lives from gun violence. And finally, she gets applause too. And then finally, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords joins us here today. On January 8th, 2011, at a constituent event in Tucson, Gabby was shot in the head by a gunman who killed 6 people and injured 12 others. She stepped down from Congress in January of 2012 to focus on her recovery. And as the nation's eyes were upon her, Gabby embarked on a path to regain her ability to speak and walk, and she inspired the country with her resilience and her optimistic spirit. In 2013, after the tragic mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, Gabby co-founded the organization today known as Giffords. Giffords has helped gun safety champions win up and down the ballot in local, state, and federal races, and has worked hard to pass life-saving legislation in states across the country and at the federal level, and she's going to help us do it here in Minnesota again. So let me invite each of our panelists to make some opening remarks, starting with you, Governor Walz.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gerlich, and thank you to all of you for coming out today, and to our panelists. And my friend, Gabby and I were classmates together in the class of '06, and I think we were fast friends on the first day in Congress, and our leader amongst our freshman class. And so grateful that she's here, and to the folks that are here. You oftentimes hear me talk about, and I'm very proud to, maybe a little un-Minnesotan, brag a little bit, that I want Minnesota to be the best state in the country to raise a family and for children. We were recently named a top 2 state for that, but I think everybody in this room knows our #1 priority, if we are going to hold true to that, is we must protect our children's safety in every way we can. And with the help of these legislators who are here, you see them here, we did move on things. And you saw the data. The first time we're starting to see data, red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders are saving lives across the country. We're able to do that across the state. Enhanced background checks. So we move these things. I want to be clear. We push some things, and we need to go back and fix things like the binary trigger that shouldn't be allowed. We lost in a court case. We'll go back. Ghost guns as new technologies develop. And I say that with everybody in this room knowing those things are enhancing lives, protecting lives, and it did nothing to infringe upon your Second Amendment rights to lawfully own a firearm as a responsible gun owner. And so the issue gets drug into that. And you heard Mark's statistic on this. The #1 cause of death for children age 1 to 19 is firearms. Since 2013 to 2021, that increased 107%. Now, after some of these recent school shootings, we heard the Vice President of the United States say school shootings are a fact of life. If that's true, it's a life that we have chosen to create. And if that's true, we can choose to create a different life, because Whenever I travel, and I know when you do this too, one of the first questions I get, if you're outside the United States, is, I don't know how you live with the stress sending your children to school. I heard that when I was in Ireland. They say, how do you live with that stress of sending them to school? Because other countries don't live with it. So I'm grateful you're all here, and I want to be very clear. This forum today, invitations were extended to all representatives. And my point is there can be chairs up here for folks, and if you disagree and think this is a bad idea, you think the governor's pushing an assault weapon ban, it doesn't make sense, high capacity magazine ban doesn't make sense, then sit up here and tell you that, and then go and vote no on it. That's your right to do so. I simply, and to the parents of Annunciation, to the parents of countless children, we simply, as Minnesotans, have to make the case that you are not going to do what you did every other place and hope we forget and drag this out and stall to the point where don't allow us to have this conversation. And I will tell all of you, we'll put it on the ballot and you can vote for a constitutional amendment on this then. Let the people vote for it. So let it get done. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Governor. Michelle, I'd like to invite you to share some opening remarks, your perspective as a teacher and a parent.
Yes, thank you. I am honored to lend my educator voice to this conversation. I am also have the lens of I've lost 3 members of my family to gun violence. Now, as an educator, I can confidently speak for every single educator that we have all thought about what we would do if there was an active shooter at our school. Every single one of us knows exactly what we would do. And I think about other things I don't know how to do. I actually don't know the best way to teach how to subtract fractions. That's not maybe my, I should be spending more time thinking about that. But I know what would happen if there was an active shooter at my window. I know what would happen if it was in the office. I know what would happen if it was in the playground. And we have our required active shooter drills multiple times a year. So every kid has thought about this too. Even if we try to shield them from the why for a lot of our younger ones, when you're in the middle of playing Quidditch in the gym or checking out library books or even doing a government unit, learning about your own governor, and you suddenly are interrupted because you need to practice hiding in the corner of your classroom and put all of the lights out, you know that there's going to be a threat to your safety and security. And I think that's what gets me the most, is because my classroom is a place of joy and innocence. Even just yesterday, we were doing highs and lows for the week, and one of my kids said, my low for the week is I found out unicorns aren't real. That is what the low for the week should be for a 9-year-old. But too often I find myself looking out at my class and thinking about how that innocence and that joy has been taken from so many kids around the country and our own state. And that lasts. After the news cycle, that trauma doesn't go away. And I don't want to live in a world where my students and my own children are fearful of being shot indiscriminately at their schools. So that's why I'm here, to change that.
Thank you, Michelle. Dr. Coomer, would you like to share some opening comments?
Thank you. Good afternoon. As was mentioned, my name is Dr. Tim Coomer. I'm an emergency physician and medical director of EMS. And on August 27th, I was the first physician on scene at the Annunciation School shooting. When I arrived, I joined our paramedics in assessing children who had been shot in the back, in the arms, and in the head. Once those critically injured children had been transported, our focus shifted to the children who said they were uninjured, although their uniforms were soaked in blood. We had to confirm whether it was their own blood or the blood of the classmate that they had tried to shield. I've cared for many victims of gun violence, and I've been on scene for many mass shootings, but that morning was very different. I saw horror in the eyes of so many children. Fear of parents desperate to know if their child was alive, and I heard screams of mothers and fathers when they were told their child was murdered. Those memories do not fade. At Annunciation, an assault weapon multiplied the number of children that were shot. An assault weapon turned potentially minor wounds into life-threatening ones, and an assault weapon intensified the trauma suffered by families, first responders, and healthcare workers. But this is not just about Annunciation. As Minnesotans, gun violence affects all of us. Whether it's a trauma center like mine, caring for patients transferred to us from across the state, or healthcare workers and first responders right here in Waconia who, much like their colleagues across the state, plan regularly for a mass shooting to happen in their own community. The fear of being shot at school or church or a sporting event has become our way of life, a way of life that we've come to accept far too easily. We're told that the gun violence epidemic is complicated, and so we simply accept this way of life. We're told it's complicated because it's actually about mental illness, when in reality, mass shooters are rarely suffering from mental illness in the way that we think about it, and blaming mental illness only further stigmatizes those struggling to get the care that they actually need. We're told it's complicated because we need to rebuild our schools to have enhanced safety entrances. This lacks evidence, and it makes our schools feel like prisons more than a welcome learning environment. Gun violence is a public health crisis, and as has been mentioned many times, this public health crisis is the leading cause of death for children and teenagers in our country. But we know how to respond to public health crises. We follow the evidence. And the evidence to this public health crisis is very clear. We must limit access to certain weapons. Weapons that by design cause more victims, not less, with more severe injuries, not minor, creating more trauma for everyone who responds and cares for them. The type of weapon matters. At Annunciation, I cared for 12-year-old Lydia Kaiser, who at first, when I saw her, appeared to have just a small abrasion to the top of her head. Yet, despite that bullet never actually entering her brain, the energy from the rifle was so great it caused life-threatening bleeding, and surgeons had to remove part of her skull. From a handgun, that would likely have only been a graze. But from a high-powered rifle, it became a life-threatening brain injury. The type of weapon matters. These weapons turn survivable injuries into fatal ones. They turn small tragedies into mass tragedies. So I'm asking you all, my fellow Minnesotans, our elected officials, most importantly on both sides of the aisle, to come together and act on this public health crisis for our children, for our teachers, for our first responders, and for each of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coomer. And finally, I'd invite Emma and Representative Giffords to share some opening remarks before we get to questions.
Yeah, so as was mentioned, I'm the executive director at Giffords, National Gun Violence Prevention Organization, founded by Gabby Giffords. We've been really honored to work in Minnesota. We're very grateful to the governor for having us here. We're grateful for the Annunciation parents who we were able to spend some time with earlier today, with First Lady Walz as well. And to Tess, I want to just tell you that there wasn't a dry eye backstage for your whole introduction. It was really outlined the stakes really beautifully. I want to just, I think it'd be best for us to kind of talk a little bit about how Giffords got started, because I also think it is a really important testament to why we should have hope on this issue. I think a lot of the time our biggest challenge is the hopelessness and the cynicism that can come along with this problem, that it's too complicated, it's too hard, it's too divisive. And so, you know, I think it's worth knowing that when Gabby was first shot, 2011, it was relatively rare at the time for a public official to be targeted the way that she was. And she stepped down from Congress, and then a year and a half later, we saw Sandy Hook the Sandy Hook shooting. And at the time, Gabby and Senator Kelly went to Congress and they started knocking on doors. They started trying to talk to people about really sort of modest, basic background check legislation federally. And a lot of folks remember this. It was the Manchin-Toomey bill, and we didn't get there.
4 votes.
Yeah, we came up short by 4 votes, and they were actually Democrats at the time, and it was this awful moment, right, where Gabby was sitting next to Obama in the Rose Garden, the Sandy Hook parents are behind them, and I think the country was like, how is it possible that 20 kindergartners died and we just did nothing? And then you fast forward a decade, so that was 2013. You fast forward a decade, you have the Uvalde shooting, 2022. And again, it is of similar scale. The nation is gripped by it, and we start knocking on doors. And this time, every single Democrat in the United States Senate, plus 15 Republicans in the United States Senate, signed on to the first gun violence prevention legislation to pass Congress in a generation, right? And it wasn't a perfect piece of legislation. It wasn't everything that we wanted, but it was $1 billion of youth mental health funding in schools. It was raising the minimum age to buy a handgun. It was $250 million community violence intervention, closing the dating partner loophole. It was tremendous progress. And I want to start there because I know that when we're talking about this issue, we're often like running up against a wall and we are trying to persuade people who don't seem persuadable. And it's important to remember that those 15 Republicans in the United States Senate were once unpersuadable too, and we got there. And I think what we've learned in social movements in the United States is that we have to work really hard and it will seem impossible until the moment that it isn't. So we are glad to be here with you, and with that, I get to turn it over to Gabrielle Giffords.
I'm Gabby Giffords. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. January 5th, 2011 changed my life forever. I was a congresswoman. I was shot in my head while meeting with my constituents. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I watched gun violence destroy too many lives. After the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, I said, enough is enough. I founded a group called Giffords. We're on a mission to end gun violence.
Thank you all, and I think you can see why we've invited these folks here to talk about this. A lot of passion, a lot of expertise. You all submitted questions in advance. There were a lot of them, so we are not going to take additional questions from the audience today. We'll try to get through as many of these that were pre-submitted as possible. And I'm going to start with a question for Gabby Giffords and Emma. Clearly here in Minnesota, the Annunciation Church shooting has been deeply on our minds and our hearts recently. You, with your national perspective, how are you all feeling about this tragedy and what it means?
So sad, so sad, so sad. Terrible. So sad. It's terrible.
Yeah. Gabby and I travel the country. Gabby spends about 60% of the time, actually, on the road all over the country, if you can believe it. And I'm probably with her for about half of that. And everywhere we have gone, actually, in the last couple of months, people have been talking about the Annunciation community and what happened. And I think that is a testament to the stories that you have shared, the advocacy that you have waged, and how gripping it was, right? That there were kids in the opening mass of the school year who were targeted that way and hurt and killed that way. So I think that there is a tremendous eye on Minnesota nationally, and we're really fortunate to have incredible leaders who are going to guide us forward in this moment to get something done.
Clearly, our country has experienced just way too much of this. So maybe a two-part question. Starting, Emma, with you. Can you help us understand where things are nationally? Why is it still such an urgent issue, and what's happening on the national landscape? And then, Governor Walz, I'll turn to you to talk about the Minnesota perspective.
Yeah, I think that often when we talk about this issue, folks sort of run up against, a bit of a brick wall, because most of the people in this room probably know that 95% of the country supports universal background checks. And I'll note that includes 93% of gun owners and 92% of voters who voted for the current president. So it is really everyone, right? It is everyone. Gabby sometimes jokes that the only thing more popular in the United States than universal background checks
Free money and ice cream.
is free money and ice cream. That's it, right? That's it. And so, I think we get to this point with people where they're like, okay, so if everybody agrees, like, what's the problem? Why haven't we been able to get ghost gun legislation, passed federally? Why haven't we been able to get universal background checks? And really, what we believe at the end of the day is that it is the gun industry itself. It is the fact that we have really powerful corporate interests that have had, and some people know this, legal protection, a really special kind of federal immunity for over 20 years, and have been able to evolve to a point where they're selling increasingly dangerous firearms and marketing them to anybody who will sell them, right? And it's only been, the moment the Sandy Hook happened was really the birth of the modern gun violence prevention movement. There'd been organizing for many decades before then, but there weren't, big national organizations spending tens of millions of dollars a year on this issue. And so, realistically, if you're zooming out, this is a problem that has been entrenched by really powerful corporate interests over time. Like so many of our other public health crises, there's a need to really hold corporate actors accountable for their practices. And it is the fact that the gun violence prevention itself is relatively young. And of course now we face, this barrier of the Trump administration. I will say we really believe that the only reason we got there on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is because of work that was done at the state level prior to that, because we were able to show that laws work at the state level, save lives at the state level, so that when the window opened federally, we were there. And I know Governor Walz can talk about what's going to happen in Minnesota, what can happen in Minnesota, but I would tell you that that is key to everything getting unlocked at the federal level as well.
Great, Governor. What about here in Minnesota? How does that compare, and what's happening here?
Yeah, and Emma's right, and I think the one thing is, of course, everything against the backdrop of increased polarization, the parties entrenching in themselves, because it wasn't all that long ago that most of the congressional districts, the majority of congressional districts would actually vote for a president of one party and a representative of another party. That has now shrunk to about a dozen as we become more polarized, more gerrymandered. And we used to have people on both sides of the issue. Congresswoman Giffords and myself were both members of the NRA. And I remember when the Sandy Hook parents came to the Capitol, and their goal was to meet with every single member who was an NRA member and to talk to us. And if I recall right, many did not take those. I did, and sat in the room with those parents to do that, and I think there has been a movement that way. Now, in the state of Minnesota, I'm going to give great credit to the leadership here. We have a couple of them here. We have Representative Stevenson's from the House, and we have Senator Murphy, and their Republican counterparts. I think a story that I lament is not going to get told. Melissa and Mark's murder in June didn't allow the story to be told of the incredible governance that was done by these caucuses. We had the most divided legislature in the country, 67-67 in the House, 34-33 or 34-32 in the Senate. And it was hard, but it was some of the most gratifying work. It was cordial, it was give and take, it was compromise. It was doing things that we wouldn't have done if it would have been to us, but we respected the process, and we ended up getting those things done. And that got derailed. And then the summer, and then the shootings. But the issue around guns becomes such an identity piece among some folks now. And I notice this when I see people, I see representatives who are opposed to any of this, and I know for a fact they've never been around firearms. They don't know quite how to talk to them. They're given talking points. Like the first thing they say is, well, you can't even define what an assault weapon is. I said, I sure the hell can, and we'll do that. But it's a talking point that was given. Why is that your first thought, to tell me I can't define what this is, rather than addressing the issue of a 107% increase of the #1 killer of our children, and perhaps we should getting the data? So I'm going to go back to what Emma said, and I think this is a really important thing. We can get through this. We did it here. These legislators passed red flag laws that the first set of data that came out, Minnesotans are alive today because they passed that red flag law on this. That's the truth. It worked. It worked. So I'm trying to come to this, and I have to be very careful, because look, if Dr. Kumar says it, if others say it. If I say it, there's hopefully 49% or less that say I don't agree with that, and they just write me off on it. But I've been making the case on this. I'm not diminishing you. If you truly believe that doing something about assault weapons and doing something about binary triggers and doing something about ghost guns and doing something about high-capacity magazines, if you think all those things are nonsense, I would have taken the opportunity today to set up here and tell you why that's nonsense and then vote against it. I am not trying to drag someone into this. I'm trying to respond to what Minnesotans are asking for is, let's change the trajectory of this. Let's do things that work. Let's compromise. We're not going to impact your Second Amendment rights negatively, because I keep hearing this, well, I enjoy plinking with these things. I heard a senator say, I enjoy plinking with these things. What would we say if he said, I enjoy driving 120 miles an hour? We'd say, well, you can't. It may be enjoyable, but you can't. And I think the idea that some type of societal safeguards around things is not the same as infringing upon your Second Amendment rights, because you have the right to not get shot. So I have to be honest with you. Here's why I'm hopeful. I'll tell you, the reason that we haven't had a vote on this yet, this goes back to what Emma said, the reason that we haven't had a vote on banning assault weapons is it would pass. Factually, it would pass. And that's where everything else Emma said about the influence of the gun manufacturers. What other tool has that type of liability or protection from that? Is protected from the liability of their product. You wouldn't accept that in a car. You wouldn't accept it in a chainsaw. But there's total immunity. And then we've gone so far as to not gather the data to get good decisions on this. We're forbidden from gathering the data around this, and it precludes us from coming up with good decisions. But here in Minnesota, I'm making this case. Other states have moved on this. There are several other states that have moved on it. The numbers show that it works. I think if we are truly going to hold true to the Minnesota that we believe in, we have to be the next state to move on this and show the rest of the country. And I'm going to make that clear.
This question is kind of a follow-up on what you just alluded to. You're a gun owner. Gun safety legislation is often misportrayed as an attempt to take away people's guns, when it's really about trying to make sure guns aren't misused, in particular when people are in crisis, when they're a threat to themselves or others. You alluded to the Extreme Risk Protection Order, a law that was passed. What more can we do in Minnesota to make sure that guns aren't misused by people who are in crisis, who are a threat to themselves or others?
Yeah, because that statistic too, did you know that your chance of being shot increases if you have a gun in your home? So we tried to pass legislation for safe storage. They should lock those up. I've always said this as a homeowner. When you get your homeowner's insurance, if you have a trampoline, which we had, your insurance goes up. If you have a dog, your insurance goes up. But you can't ask about a gun? The idea about this is that responsible gun owners lock their guns up. Responsible gun owners keep them away from children. Responsible gun owners understand what these things were designed for, and Dr. Kumar brought this up. Your shotgun is designed very specifically, and the ammunition that's in it, to shoot different types of animals, sporting-wise. Your hunting rifle's the same way. These assault rifles were not created for that. They are coming out of the arms industry. They are specifically created to kill human beings. We've got children at Annunciation that have 3 times the elevated lead levels because they have shrapnel in their body that we can't get out, because it's lead ammunition that's meant to scatter. You don't do that with animals. So I said, if you're a responsible gun owner, why would you not want to pass these things? We tried to pass, if your gun is stolen, you should be required to report that to the police. None of those things infringe upon your Second Amendment rights, and I think it's important that we continue to say that. But we have always in this country, going back to the 1920s, had restrictions on the type of weapons because of the damage they could do, whether they were automatic weapons or whatever. But now we have people passing legislation to have silencers on there. Well, we need silencers on there because of the noise. Wear an earplug. And then, I mean, it's gotten to the point where it is the manufacturers trying to sell things. They're shielded from immunity, And in this country, we sell 40,000 guns every single day. We have 400 plus million guns on the streets. And if you look around every other country, no one else has this problem the way we have it. They have mental health issues. They have people in poverty. They have whatever else you want to name. The difference is we have massive amounts of weapons of war on the streets that are cheap and easily accessible, and nobody wants, well, I shouldn't say that. A number of people want to continue down that path. So I'm hopeful here in Minnesota that this, I think if you polled, we'll find out, I think if you polled people who were gun owners, the majority would say, yeah, do something about these things. Do something about them. And that's what our intention is, to do that.
Great, thank you. It's a question for you, Dr. Coomer. We've talked about this a few times today. It's been mentioned that we've got a public health crisis here, right? This is not our first public health crisis. If you think about comparing the gun injury public health crisis with others, what lessons can we learn about how we can apply that to this particular one?
Two things come to mind. We need to talk and listen, right? So we need to listen to the experts, right? As Governor Walz has mentioned, it's very difficult to study what guns do to society, but there's a little bit out there. There's a little bit of research out there, and the research says that if we don't have assault weapons, turns out mass shootings aren't as deadly. If we don't have assault weapons, then there aren't as many victims at shootings. Those are good things. Imagine if we had all this research out there. So we don't really have a ton of research, we're working on it, but we have other experts. We have healthcare experts, we have trauma surgeons, we have neurosurgeons who go in and take care of these organs after they've been shot by a handgun or after they've been shot by an assault rifle. Different things happen, right? We should listen to those folks. We have law enforcement. Law enforcement is begging us to get these weapons off the street. Why? Because it's dangerous. We have police officers who have been murdered by these weapons. We have firefighters. We have paramedics in our state that have been murdered by these weapons. Listen to the chiefs of police who are asking for this to happen. We need to listen. Then we got to talk about it, right? When we think of people with drunk driving, what do all the billboards say, right? Talk to your friend. Hey, I think you've had too many. Can I have your keys, right? When your kids are going over to someone's house, hey, do you have any weapons in the house? Do you lock them up? Right? We got to talk about this stuff. And we're doing it here, and we have tremendous leadership who's doing it, but it's up to us to talk about it, right? And talking politics, oh, Lord. But this is important. This is killing our children. This is what brings us all together. I've had more people reach out to me over the last few months saying, all right, this is something I'm willing to go in on. Let's use that energy. So let's address this public health crisis by talking about it with each other. And I think we'll all be really surprised that this might be one of the things that we all agree upon.
Yeah, thank you. And you alluded to this. It's not just making stuff up. I mean, this has been studied. We have evidence. Michelle, maybe, you're the educator in the room. Educate us about what metrics do we have that demonstrate that safe gun laws actually are effective at preventing injury and death?
Yes, I would be happy to, because as an educator, I've got my facts here. And as I tell my students, be a problem solver, so I also have some solutions. So here's 3 facts regarding gun laws. We know that states with universal background checks experience over 50% less suicides by firearm and around 1/3 less suicides overall. Having lost someone to an 18-year-old cousin to suicide by a gun, that is a very important issue for me. And that's significant because about 6 in 10 gun deaths in the United States are suicides, and access to guns triples the risk of death by suicide. Number 2, we know that secure firearm storage can reduce gun violence in all forms, yet 4.6 million children still live in households where a gun is loaded and unlocked, and nearly 75% of school shooters got their weapons from a parent or close relative. School boards can help build awareness on this by providing annual information about secure storage. Number 3, we know, as Dr. Kumar referenced, that when an assault weapon is used in a mass shooting, which it often is, over 150% more people will be shot and about 50% more people will die versus shootings that don't include assault weapons. But while gun laws are an essential part of this, and it is one part of one complex issue. And I don't get to talk to a lot of adults, and I definitely don't get to talk to adults in power. So if you'll humor me for a second, I have 4 other suggestions that relate to the schools specifically. Because we also know that many mass shooters experience childhood trauma, and nearly all experience an identifiable crisis in the months leading up to the violence. So here are 4 additional steps that we can do. Our schools need to be universally trained on trauma-informed practices in order to realize the impact on the brain, recognize the symptoms of trauma, and respond appropriately as to not re-traumatize and continue the cycle. I have had 0 professional development on that. Number 2, as a society, we need to build on some of the policies that have been implemented under Governor Walz to provide a strong safety net for families, including adequate jobs, affordable child care, affordable health insurance, paid parental leave, and access to high-quality mental health treatment. Number 3, in over 90% of mass school shootings or attempted mass school shootings, the shooter was a current or former student. And between 75% to over 90% of those students, depending on the study, leak their plans prior to the shooting, usually to a peer. Anonymous reporting systems, tips lines, and even apps exist to report these, but they need to be well publicized and universally available. And finally, we need to fund counselors and mental health professionals in schools. Threat assessment teams, which include counselors and mental health professionals who work to intervene when students demonstrate warning signs, are effective at preventing violence and getting students the help they need. I truly believe that nobody wants our children living like this. Nobody. And the first step to solving a problem is understanding it. And we understand it thanks to organizations like Giffords, thanks to Everytown, thanks to our own Minnesota The Violence Project. We understand it. And it's going to take all of us, but together I do believe we can prevent it.
Thank you. So we're coming up on time here. Before we close, though, Representative Giffords, you've traveled all this way to be here with us. We are so grateful and thrilled to have you here. I just want to give you your opportunity to share any of your last thoughts before we bring on our last speakers.
Stopping gun violence takes courage. The courage to do what's right, the courage of new ideas. I've seen great courage won my life on the line. Now is the time to come together, be responsible. Democrats, Republicans, Independents. We must never stop fighting. Fight, fight, fight.
Amen.
Be bold, be courageous. The nation's counting on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank, give one more round of applause for all of our panelists for being here today, for sharing their expertise. And thank you all. And I'd like to welcome up to the stage for our final closing comments, Senate Majority Leader Aaron Murphy and House DFL Leader Zach Stevenson.
Good afternoon. I've been sitting backstage and listening, and I can feel your energy and your presence, and it is good to see all of you as well as listen to you. I'm Aaron Murphy. I am the proud Senate Majority Leader. I'm also a registered nurse and a brand new grandparent. I want to thank Governor Walz and First Lady Gwen Walz, who I know is here, the amazing Gabby Giffords. Thank you for being here in Minnesota. The Annunciation family and parents, and for all of the panelists for bringing your wisdom to this important discussion. I also want to thank all of you I want to thank all of you for bringing yourselves to this very important fight, and I will tell you, anytime we have made profound change in the state of Minnesota, it is because the people have pushed us, and yes, you are pushing us. Thank you for being here. Here's proof. Here's proof. In the last 3 years, my Democratic colleagues in the House and the Senate moved important pieces of legislation improving gun safety and preventing gun violence prevention. That is because of you. That is because of your work and your organizing and your push on us, and we have more to do. We have more to do in that. The events of this year, and in particularly the events of this summer, have really tested my hope, but they've also strengthened my resolve. A comprehensive agenda to move through the legislature includes a number of things, and my colleagues are working to make this possible. We need to strengthen mental health across the board in the state of Minnesota, and we have to understand what is radicalizing people to take such violent action like we saw on June 14th or at the school at Annunciation. We need to make sure our schools are safe and well-staffed to be able to respond to the needs of students and to make sure that everybody is safe. And yes, we have to act on weapons of war, banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. We do. And it goes without saying that we need both our Democrats and our Republicans to engage in this fight. And we need to love our children the most. So let's work together to prevent people from being shot, wounded, and killed. Thank you for being here. I am so proud to introduce to you my colleague, Leader Zach Stevenson. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leader Murphy. Thank you, panelists, for the excellent discussion today. But most of all, thank you all for taking time to be here today on this little rainy, drizzly October day to talk about something very, very important to people all across the state of Minnesota. I hope all of you, like me, are leaving today a little more encouraged, a little more informed, and even a little more hopeful than you were when you walked in. But I also hope you're leaving feeling resolved, because this is going to be a long, long fight. And we are in it for the long haul, but we're going to need your help. And so I'm asking each and every one of you, when you leave today, go home, look up online the name of your state representative and your state senator, and send them an email or make a phone call, or better yet, both, and tell them that you want comprehensive solutions to gun violence in Minnesota, and you want it now. You know, it is so easy in this day and age, particularly in 2025 in America, to feel helpless and hopeless and discouraged, but you have tremendous power. I'll just tell you, I represent 40,000 people in my district up in Anoka and Coon Rapids, but sometimes it feels like I only represent 40 because I hear from the same people over and over again. If you email your state representative, you will make an impact. When I hear from like 3 people on the same issue, I just assume that everyone in Coon Rapids is talking about it. So please, go home today, look up the name of your state representative, look up the name of your state senator, and send them an email and give them a phone call. Will you do that? Will you do that for us today? Thank you. Thank you. It's important, and it will make a difference. I also want to announce today, this is just the first of many town halls that we will be having all across the state of Minnesota. We're going to keep this conversation going. We're going to keep it going until the House passes a bill, the Senate passes the bill, and the governor signs a bill that makes meaningful gun violence legislation. All right. So, I do want to tell you where that's going to be. The next town hall will be Thursday, November 6th in the wonderful city of Rochester, Minnesota. For anyone who wants to go, you can go online and register at dfl.org/fightforgvp, and location will be sent to everybody who signs up. And then we will go on to the next one and the next one after that. We're never going to keep up. We're never going to stop fighting, and you're an important part of that. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for everything you're going to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our town hall today. Thank you for attending.